Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today's video we're going to be talking about adiposephobia, or rather fat phobia, and that is the fear of gaining fat when going through a gaining phase or a mass building phase or a bulking phase, when you're trying to gain muscle and you're worried about the tag along fat that's going to come with it. And a lot of people, I've worked with hundreds of people that suffer with this adiposephobia, this fear of fat gain, and it really holds back their progress. And I myself also went through this. And by getting people past this, and also through my own story and journey and getting past this, been able to grow heaps of muscle tissue that we're otherwise leaving on the table. So I'm going to create this comprehensive vlog style, documentary style video for you guys so that you can kind of look at this, reflect upon it, see my story, and see kind of the points that I outlined to help you get past this and gain heaps of muscle on the other side. So let's get into it. So let me take you through my previous mindset that I had surrounding going through these mass building phases. And that, first of all, was that staying leaner was just better for muscle growth. By staying leaner, I had a superior partitioning ratio, and therefore I would partition more of my surplus towards muscle tissue than fat tissue. And so I always tried to stay lean, and I'd always have like a focus on, have I still got my abs? Am I still looking kind of at a low body fat? And I'd always just try and stay on this leaner side, and that inevitably means you're not going to be able to push as far up in body weight and body fat, and that potentially could hold you back. We're going to kind of look into that. The second was also that muscle gain's really slow. You're going to be lucky as a natural to gain a pound of muscle in a year. This was kind of the mentality I had, and it also confirmed my biases behind not gaining too fast and staying lean. And so I'd have this one, trying to stay lean because that should improve the amount of muscle that I could potentially gain, and I'll gain less fat this way. And also that I can only gain so much muscle, so I should gain really, really slowly, put myself in a really small surplus, and that's kind of the solution. Now I just continue to eat in a really small surplus and stay lean for as long as possible up until the point where I decide, right, actually now is time to cut down so I can get lean again before I build back up. Ultimately, what that attitude led to was, and some of you might be able to kind of relate to this, was I was very scale focused, because I'd be weighing in every day and seeing how's my weight changing. And if it was up a couple of pounds on a single day, that would create quite a lot of anxiety, because I can't have gained 2 pounds of muscle. There's barely any muscle being created, and surely 2 pounds is just way too much in a single day. And maybe I'd leave it another day, and maybe it would stay this high, and then my week average versus the last week was up 2 pounds. I'm like, oh no, like I'm trying to just gain a pound a month. That's kind of the target I'd aim for, and I'd get really kind of neurotic about these things, and I'd end up making changes very regularly. So it'd be like 1 week I was up like 2-3 pounds maybe, and then I'd cut back 100 calories or 200 calories maybe. Then the next week I'd be down 4 pounds. And I was like, oh no, I'm trying to be in a gaining phase. What am I doing? I need to create and boost my calories back up. I put them back up, and you can see these kind of changes that you're making on a frequent basis. Essentially, I was just kind of like hovering in around maintenance, small surplus, small deficit, and by like many months down the line, maybe 6 months, just kind of maintained weight the entire time, because I was just trying to monitor such a small change in body weight. And that was, one, stressful, but also ultimately led to me kind of just maintaining in the long term. And then the other thing that also staying leaner led to was, essentially, I always had just senses of diet fatigue. And what I mean by diet fatigue is I always had an element of food focus. I was always a little bit hungry. I was holding on to a lot of my diet habits. I call them leaner living habits, and they're good for dieting. They're good for staying like really lean. But that wasn't the goal, right? My goal wasn't to stay really lean. My goal was to gain muscle mass. And I was essentially holding myself back. And what those two things did, with not really being in a surplus, staying a bit leaner than what would be ideal for me and for me to feel my best, is my performance in the gym was not great. And so I kind of convinced myself that surely if I train hard and I continue to do that, create this stimulus for muscle growth, I think, and I eat well, and I'm comfortable, and comfort doesn't really bring around change very often, does it? And so ultimately, not too much happened during this period of time. So here you have me on the left in 2014, and that was before my first bodybuilding show. On the right is 2017, so 3 years later, having gone through many of this kind of massing period where I kind of held my body weight down to 180 pounds, about the most I ever went to, and in a very small surplus. In both images, left to right, I am 160 to 165 pounds. So very similar stage weight. I would say slightly leaner on the right, which you can also see I look better in terms of my structure. You can see I've got more muscle visually, but I wasn't particularly enthralled by the progress that I'd made, especially considering my stage weight was very similar and ultimately wasn't that much leaner. So I knew something probably needed to change. So what I came to realize was how important a surplus is, but for you to know you're in a surplus, it has to be trackable. And to make it trackable, it needs to be a realistic amount of kind of weight gain that you're looking to achieve. If you're trying to gain a pound or less on a monthly basis, it's so easy to get very concerned about these fluctuations. And to be honest, fluctuations are going to come for the party. In fact, you should expect that even to be sometimes these kind of, I call them growth spurts, where suddenly you'll be kind of gaining at maybe a fine pace, or maybe it could even be a bit slow, and then suddenly you'll be weighing 2 pounds heavier, and then you'll just maintain that. It's important not to get too concerned about these sort of things because they do happen. I've seen it with, again, hundreds of clients. I've seen it with myself. And it's just reminding yourself of what the ultimate goal is. Ultimately, I do want body weight to come up. Obviously, we don't want it to come up too fast. My recommendation for you would be gaining about 0.25 to 0.5% every week. But I'd actually look at that on a bi-weekly basis. So I'd look every 2 weeks, you gaining 0.5% to a percentage of your body weight. And if you're within or close to this range, you're probably doing just fine. And you don't need to stress about it more than that. The reason you look on a bi-weekly basis is because it's quite slow. And also, unlike when you're in a diet, when you're in a surplus, you're not adapting super rapidly. So quite often the body has more adaptive and protective mechanisms to the way down than the way up. Kind of depends on the person and where they are, but in most scenarios you'll kind of find this. So you want to find this trackable surplus. Again, that's because to gain serious amounts of muscle, you need to be in a surplus. Now, you can convince yourself that body recomposition can occur. Therefore, you can eat at maintenance and maybe gain muscle and lose some fat. And what I'd say is that can happen. It absolutely can happen. You don't have to be in a surplus to gain muscle. When you are getting lots of things right, I always think about, well, what if that was in a situation with a surplus? That would mean you grow even more muscle in that situation than if you were recomping. And ultimately, fat is easy to lose, whereas muscle is really hard to gain. I always use the analogy of kind of building muscle is like cycling uphill. It's a really hard process. You don't want to make that process any harder than necessary. And actually, you want to make it as easy as possible. Trying to gain muscle whilst being at maintenance is like trying to cycle uphill with like the handbrake on, whereas kind of being in a surplus is like taking the handbrake off. And it's just like, not that a bike has a handbrake, but you know what I mean. It's kind of much easier that way. And fat loss is like cycling downhill. For the majority of people, it's just far easier. For your body to lose fat, it's far easier than it is to build new tissue. It just is, and muscle tissue. It's just a more expensive, and it's a process the body doesn't want to do. So gaining serious amounts of muscle probably requires a surplus. And it's definitely your best bet for growing muscle. What you can do nutritionally, it's the most powerful thing you could do nutritionally is provide a surplus of calories, along with sufficient protein, and you're doing a lot of things right in that scenario. So the other thing a surplus is going to do for you that maintenance won't do as much, and certainly a deficit won't do, is promote training. And by that, I mean your recovery is going to be better with a surplus. You've got more raw materials to help recover, and your adaptability is also going to be better. And ultimately, what drives muscle gain is not the surplus, because if you were just in a surplus and you didn't train, would you gain muscle? No, you wouldn't. So your nutrition is just permissive of the training that you're doing in the gym, and you're providing the signal. I always talk about training as lighting the match for muscle gain. It's so important, and you can enhance your training via a surplus. And therefore, if you're training really hard and it's progressive, then you can fuel muscle gain by having that surplus available for you. So that's something really important to focus on, is how is training going? And on that note, the level of leanness. Partitioning ratios have been essentially debunked in that being leaner isn't superior for muscle gain. In fact, there's probably a body weight where you feel your best at, and that's probably the one where it's going to promote the most muscle gain. And that's because if you feel your best, you're probably performing your best in the gym. Whereas if you're really lean, many of you will have been there, maybe even competitors, you're not training your best when you're competing. Whereas when you get up to, probably for men, the low teens of body fat, females can maybe add 5 to 7% percentage above that, where you're kind of lean but not like shredded. That's probably like a really good starting point. And then you can gain up to maybe where you get fairly soft. It will depend person to person. Again, men maybe 20% where you haven't really got any clear definition going on, and females, again, adding 5 to 7% above that, but a similar kind of body composition. Anywhere within that zone, you're probably feeling pretty damn good, and your partitioning ratio probably isn't all that different, to be honest. Would remove that from kind of your rationale behind staying leaner, and I would be at a body composition where you can train your hardest, because again, what's promoting muscle gain is training. So if you're training your best, you're probably promoting muscle gain at the best rate. And like I said, if you're too over fat or too like under fat, essentially, you're not going to be feeling your best or promoting the best training. And therefore you want to kind of stay within this range, which is probably fairly wide. And the final thing to realize is like fat gain is inevitable. As you get more advanced, that's where kind of this ratio changes, where when you're less advanced, you're going to gain more muscle than fat with that surplus. But as you get more advanced, you're going to gain more fat than muscle. It's just part of the process. It's essentially the cost of doing business. I think about this, another analogy is like building a house. When you're building a house, you're building the foundation, you're building kind of the rooms, all of this stuff. Obviously, there's a lot of dirt that's kind of being created at that time. There's a lot of dust and debris. But if you kept building a little bit, cleaning, it will take you so long. Whereas if you build the foundation, then you can kind of clean up. And that's kind of that process of being in a surplus, really building and then quickly kind of cleaning up with those cutting periods. And just know that, yeah, fat gain is inevitable, except it's part of the process. Don't focus on that. Focus on gym performance over how you're physically looking, because ultimately this is like a long journey and it's a long process, right? So that's some of the things that I did that I came to realize and really helped me grow.
Steve at the peak of his bulk. Sure. Well, look at him. God damn. That is like 200 pounds.
202.
Yeah.
I thought it might be useful to see a little bit more of how my peak mass looked. These are pictures actually taken the exact same place where I was talking with Pascal there. And you can see, like, I put a lot more mass on my frame. I'm over 200 pounds in these photos, holding at a reasonable level of leanness. For me, this is like I was completely uncomfortable. I was definitely up at that upper end of kind of the intervention point, or that body fat sweet spot where you feel good and you can perform well. I was very uncomfortable at this point. This isn't where I would say start contest prep, by the way, but I'm just showing you how big I really am compared to where I let myself get to before, which was 180 pounds. That's where I used to cap myself. I'm more than 20 pounds heavier than that here. And my stage weight wasn't even that far off 180 pounds. 180 pounds to me now is a very lean and muscular physique versus where it was before. But I thought I'd just give you this additional insight before we get into the rest. And there I was, my peak mass, over 20 pounds heavier than I'd ever pushed my mass up before. And what did it yield? Well, you can see here, 2017, the same images as you were seeing before, versus 2021. So this is 4 years later. I did actually try to compete in 2020, just didn't work out. And what's the difference in stage weight here? 10 pounds, at least. So on the left here, I was between 160 to 165 pounds. On the right, that's 175 pounds I weighed on that day. I did have some kind of later weigh-ins below 175 pounds, but there's a good 10 pounds of muscle tissue. I was at least as lean, probably leaner, with much more muscle mass on my frame. And this is later in my bodybuilding career, where you'd expect me to be gaining less muscle. But it wasn't the case, because I did things so much better. I invested. And ultimately, you'd be really crazy to work super hard for something and not get in return what you should, just because you didn't implement something that's ultimately relatively easy. So guys, in conclusion, know that the biggest bodybuilders, the biggest and most muscular individuals are great at delayed gratification. They are great at keeping the goal the goal. The grass is always going to seem greener. It's always going to seem like you want to go into this cut phase because you missed that element, but focus on the goal now and the processes that are going to take you to that. Accept that some fat gain is going to happen, accept that the scale is going to need to go up, and really focus on driving performance in the gym, and you'll be surprised how much muscle you will have gained when you do pull back through a cut phase in the future to reveal all those new gains that you've made. And guys, if this sort of information is stuff that you are really appreciating, you want to learn more about how to kind of gain muscle, lose fat, all that good stuff, do be sure to subscribe to the channel, share it with anyone you think might be interested, give me a comment about something, maybe you have a question from this episode here, or you want to see something in future, let me know. Otherwise, guys, I appreciate you, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.